All right, so here's a simple program for you to find the quotient and the remainder given two numbers, right? So here's the Python program. You have two input statements. In the first input statement, you ask the user to enter the first number and then store the value in a variable called number1, right? And then in the next line, you do the same thing and ask the user to enter a second number and convert that to an integer. In both cases, you convert both those numbers, both those strings to an integers, right? And then save the second integer to a variable called number2, right? So you have two numbers which are stored in number1 and number2, right? So let's say the user enters 100 in the first line and then 3 in the second line, okay? Now the quotient q is equal to number1. So this is another variable. These two, quotient and remainder, these are again two more variables that we just defined, right? So this q for quotient equals to the number1 and then these two slashes, right? Two slashes, number2. So the value of q would be the quotient of 100 by 3, which is, as we know, which is equal to 33, right? And r, which is the variable that stores the remainder, would be the number1, and this operation is called modulo, right? This is called modulo. Okay, so number1 modulo number2, which will give you 100 modulo 3, which is equal to the remainder of this division, which is just 1, right? So if you run this program with the inputs 103, you'll get integer quotient and then these colons, right? And then 33, and integer remainder is 1. Okay. Similarly, if you run it with some other pair of numbers, for example, let's say you run this with 5 and 2, right? The quotient would be the integer division, which is 2, right? Because 2 times 2 is 4, and then you have 1 remaining, right? So the result of this division would be 2, and the result of this modulo operation would be 1. So your final output would be integer quotient is 2 and the integer remainder is 1, right? So let's just just do some basic shell coding, right, in our Python console to see that those two operations work as expected, right? So 100 divided by 10 gives you 10 decimal o, right? But when you say 100 and then two slashes, which is the integer division 10, it will give you just 10, right? And again, the space doesn't matter. You may want to add spaces for readability. So if you do 100 modulo integer division 10, it's the same result, right? And if you do 100 modulo 10, that gives you 0, because 100 is perfectly divisible by 10, right? So there is no remainder, right? But for other number pairs, right? So for example, 1 2 3 4 divided by, I don't know, 100 gives you 12, right? Because when you try to divide 1 2 3 4 by 100, you get 12 decimal 34, right? So if you do 1 2 3 4 divided by 100, which is the normal division, I'm sorry, 100, right? You get 12 decimal 34, and the integer division will just give you the whole part, right? The part before the decimal. So you get 12, right? And for the same pair of numbers, if you want to find the remainder of this division, right? 1 2 3 4 modulo 100, what will you get? You'll get 3 4, right? Because that's the remainder of this division, right? So that's how this works.